Welcome to Satsang. So beautiful to be together with you all. And as usual, we'll start with a question that's come in advance from our global family from around the world, and then we'll open it up to any questions that anyone here has. भैया ऊपर बंद करा दीजिएगा ना, जो काम चल रहा है ऊपर उसको बंद करा दीजिएगा. धन्यवाद. What is your greatest joy as a spiritual teacher and leader? There's so much joy in all of the different beautiful roles that I have an opportunity to play on earth. But I think for me, I think the greatest joy is being able to offer people the awareness, the truth, the reality that actually they, in wherever they are at this moment, whatever they have earned, achieved, acquired, learned, wherever they're from, whatever they've experienced, that no matter any of their external life drama situations, that actually they can find and live in the joy and the peace that they're looking for. To me, I think that's the most powerful experience of joy, is being able to be that vehicle to help people see that they don't have to suffer. You know, when we suffer, it's so interesting because most of us look at our troubles, look at our challenges, especially as we're having them or immediately afterwards, and we think, my God, that was awful, it's unfair, I wish I didn't have it. And I certainly went through that for a long time with my own struggles and my own challenges. But now, decades later, in retrospect, when I look back, I think, thank God. Thank God that I had those experiences that, yeah, if I had a magic wand, I would undo them from anyone I could. They're not experiences I would ever wish upon anyone. But thank God that I had them, because it was those experiences that today enable me to actually serve as that vehicle, to be able to serve as someone who knows pain, knows suffering, knows challenges, even knows trauma, severe trauma, and yet who knows peace and freedom. And it's been such a blessing, because so many of us have this idea that in order to know freedom, in order to know ecstasy, you have to somehow be cut from a really different cloth. And that if you're someone who suffers, if you're someone who's experienced trauma or a lot of challenges, that you don't then simultaneously get to be someone in this life who really knows freedom or who really knows bliss. People get very resigned to their suffering. And so if I had to choose only one thing, I mean, there's so much that's joyful, But if I had to choose only one thing, I think it's being able to really help people see that no matter what you've experienced, no matter how you self-identify, no matter what your life karmic yatra journey has been, you actually can have what we call moksha, liberation, freedom. That grace doesn't discriminate. You're not disqualified. There's no prerequisites that are required for grace. Every one of us. It's our birthright. And I think because I've had the experiences that I've had, both the suffering and trauma and the divine spiritual experiences, that it's a really blessed place to stand in. And I think for me that's probably the greatest joy of that role as a teacher, as a leader, is, people, they trust you then. And to have people who trust me listen and understand that freedom and that peace and that joy is possible for you, no matter what's going on in your life, is such a blessing. And it's such a joy to see so many people find that joy. To have so many people come back and say, God, I remember I met you a year ago, 5 years ago, 15 years ago, and I was really suffering, but you told me this. And I took it to heart. And then my life changed. And that's just such an extraordinary blessing. I can't even begin to tell you. So I think that would be the greatest joy in the spiritual teacher part. And then when you think about a spiritual leader, I think more about the roles of that, the sort of standing on stages, the being in events as the designated, spiritual leader, and in many cases the designated Hindu spiritual leader. And I think my greatest joy in those roles is being female and being someone who, for us, spirituality is actually on the ground, and being able in those places to stand, not just as your Hindu leader or spiritual leader or faith leader, but as someone who, A, is female, because there's so few females in that space, that every time I find myself as the only woman on a stage or the only woman on a panel, realizing that if I weren't there, there wouldn't be a woman on that panel, or there wouldn't be a woman on that stage, there's a great joy of, wow, thank God I'm here, and thank God I'm female to be able to do that. But also, thank God to Pujya Swamiji, to my guru, who teaches us all and shows us through his life how spirituality is all about how you live on the ground every minute, every moment. And so it's not just about talking the talk. It's not just about the speeches, but it's about getting better each day. These coughs take such a long time. But it's about actually living that and embodying that, whether it's I just got back from Singapore, where I was for several days at a large event where I had the beautiful blessing of being in that role as Hindu spiritual leader. But unfortunately, the hall that they kept the event in was so cold that within the first few hours of being in the hall, my throat was sore and it ended up developing into a full-blown thing. But as I was saying, the blessing of Pujya Swamiji and the lineage that we have, the spiritual lineage that then we carry with us as his disciples wherever we go, is that idea that as spiritual leaders, it's not just the speeches that we give from stages or platforms, but it's actually the work that we're doing on the ground. And whether it's the very specific charitable humanitarian work, whether it's education or women or water or the environment or sick people, or whether it's just the way in which we serve, whether it's sweeping the floor, making a cup of tea, designing a website, writing an article, sending a letter, balancing the accounts, doing a social media post, whatever it might be. But that idea that everything that we do in service is the spiritual practice. That it's not, oh, the spiritual leadership is just here on a stage. But it's actually, how do we embody these teachings? And how do we share them and spread them every minute? And maybe it's just giving someone a smile or a hug or a cup of hot tea. Whether it's giving someone an education, whatever it may be. But it's a very unique and very special role, and it's something that I take very, very seriously and very preciously. To actually be able to be there as a leader, but then to be able to also know that it's not just on the stage, but that actually for me the spiritual leadership is every minute and every moment. And then to be able to share with people, you know, here's what for us spirituality looks like embodied. Here it is in the children we're reaching. Here it is in the women we're reaching. Here it is in the sick people we're reaching. Here it is in the trees we're planting. Here it is in this. Here it is in that. Because it's one thing to talk about attaining heaven after you die, and traditionally that's what spiritual leaders do, is they give a lot of talks on how after you die you can attain heaven or moksha. But it's a whole other story to work to actually create heaven right here, and to engage people and inspire people to actually create heaven in their lives right here. And that's what we're all really committed to. It's not after you die. It's right here, right now. How can you create heaven in your mind and your heart? And then how can you be an instrument of creating heaven for the world that we live in? So that was a lot of joy in those two different roles. Yeah, there's so much more, but I'll end that one there. Any other questions? Yes. Let's stay.
Firstly, I seek your blessings. Thank you so much. I'm so blessed. I want to know what is spiritual awakening, and are there some chosen one who get
उनकी
to
माइक चालू नहीं है भैया. चलो है. Can you hear her?
Okay, hello.
Yes,
Okay.
now you're good.
Okay, so my question is, what is spiritual awakening, and are there some chosen one who get to experience this in this lifetime, or anyone can experience that with consciousness or awareness or with desire?
Beautiful. Spiritual awakening. What is it and who is it for? So, if you think about when we sleep in the night, right? There's 3 main phases of sleep. And I won't go into too much about the science of sleep, but for the sake of the discussion, 3 main phases of sleep. Deep sleep, in which you're not dreaming. That's your most restorative sleep. Deep sleep, no dream, no nothing, just very, very deep. Then your light sleep. You're also not dreaming, but it's not quite as deep. Maybe you're tossing and turning, maybe you're kind of awake, then asleep, then awake, then asleep, then awake, then asleep. And then you've got your dream sleep, what we call REM sleep. But whatever phase of sleep you're in, whatever stage of sleep you're in, when you wake up, it's over. Sometimes it's harder to wake up. You wake up in the middle of deep sleep. That's when you feel like you've been hit by a truck. Wake up in light sleep, it's a lot easier. You wake up in the middle of a dream and it takes a few minutes to kind of wrap your head around where you are and what's happening. But in any of the stages of sleep, in just a few moments, it's over. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't remember your dream. Many times we've got lessons from our dreams. We remember them. We carry them with us. Sometimes we don't. But that sleep is over. Now, when we talk about spiritual awakening, Pujya Swamiji always says it doesn't mean that suddenly you grow horns and like from a distance you can say, oh, that person, that's the awakened one, that's the enlightened one, that somehow you look different. It's not that. It's that you're no longer in the sleep that most of us sadly consider awake, right? We consider what we do in our bed to be sleeping and what we do the rest of the time to be awake. But when you go spiritually, well, this is all actually still asleep, meaning that in the same way that in my dream, I'm identifying as whatever role I'm playing in that dream, whatever's happening in the dream, it seems very real. There's fear, there's anger, there's excitement, there's joy. And you know that. You wake up sometimes and there's still this anger or this fear or a nice feeling. But it was just a dream. There you are in your bed. Well, spiritually, it's the same thing. When you have that experience, all of that which you always thought was so real, all the roles that you play, all the things that you thought were so important, your status, your role, the bank account, your title, your respect, your achievements, your dramas. When you wake up from that, suddenly, it's this, oh. And it's not that you don't remember it, but it no longer has a hold on you. Like you may wake up and think, God, I dreamt that I was being, chased by these masked murderers. But you're no longer afraid. Even though you remember that that's what you were dreaming, it no longer has any hold on you because you know it was a dream. And so in the same way, all of the things that had that grip on you, oh my God, what if I don't get this promotion, this raise? What if this person doesn't like me? What if this person's mean to me? What if I don't earn this much money? What's going to happen to the money I have earned? What about this? What about that? When awakening happens, you realize that was all a dream. And what's beautiful about it, there's so much that's beautiful about it, but it's not that you leave this world. It's not that you say, oh, it's a dream, forget it, I'm just going to sit here under a tree forever and who cares? It's that you are able then to move through the world as a vehicle, in service, in love, in truth, without getting stuck. The Buddha, the word Buddha means the awakened one. And that was how he kept describing it to people, was not, I'm somehow cut from some different cloth, or I'm somehow some different being. I just woke up. I sat here under this tree and I meditated until I woke up. Until the curtain of illusion disappeared. And so awakening is really just that. I know for me, when I had my very unexpected, unanticipated, undeserved on every level of sadhana, I had never done any sadhana. When I had that experience of awakening, standing on the banks of Ganga, when I first got here, that transformed me, the experience was this immediate experience of, oh my God, all of the way that I've thought about myself as small, as separate, as not good enough, not full enough, not worthy enough, somehow lacking in this way, that way. All the way that I've thought about myself as the victim of this, the sufferer of that. Suddenly it was like that was just over. And I realized in that moment that I wasn't separate from the divine, that there was divinity everywhere, including in me. And so for me, the first veil that got pulled off was the veil of thinking that somehow I was separate, less than, an object in some way. And the awareness that I was one with the divine. And then as the time went on, different veils just kept lifting, but it's that type of experience. And it doesn't have to always be, by any means, the way it happened to me. It can be a moment. You could be sitting on the banks of Ganga, you could be sitting in Arti, you could be sitting in meditation, and suddenly you awaken from a particular dream that you've been in. There's no rule that says it has to all happen at once in some major big bang. It can happen in phases. It can happen spontaneously. It can happen in the midst of a sacred experience. But what's important is that all of us keep putting ourselves in situations where it's likely to happen. And that's the second point is, are there certain people chosen? Yeah. The ones who have taken birth as humans. That's what it said, is that the human birth is the pinnacle of evolution, of physical evolution. Because only as humans are we able to have that experience of awakening. But amongst humans, no, we're all eligible. Yeah, we come in with different karmic packages. For some, it may seem like a smoother path, a shorter path, an easier path. For some, it may be longer, it may be full of more struggles. But there's absolutely no rule whatsoever that says that anyone who is currently in a human incarnation with a yearning for spiritual growth can't have awakening. What we have to do is let go of our attachment to the sleep. Because many of us live in this metaphoric, continual hitting of the snooze button, right? Like in normal sleep, the alarm goes off, we hit it off so we can sleep a little more. We know I need to get up. But the mind and the body is in this state of sleep. And we want to just keep sleeping. And the same thing happens spiritually. The ego doesn't want to be unimportant. And the more spiritual awakening you have, the less you roll out the red carpet for your ego. Most of us tend to be slaves to our ego. Whatever the ego says, we do it. But the more and more spiritually grounded you become, the more clarity there is, the more freedom there is, the more your ability to say, yeah, I hear the ego, but I've got an option. There's an alternative. Yes, I could yell. Yes, I could scream. Yes, I could hit someone. Yes, I could get really upset and send off this fiery, obnoxious email back. I'll show them. I could, but I don't have to. Because I've done that before. I know where that ends up. And so we start to develop what in Sanskrit we call vivek, a power of discrimination. So the ego doesn't really want that to happen. And so the ego is going to try to keep you from waking up. It's going to try to keep you stuck. That's when we talk about Maya. Maya is that illusion that's just trying to constantly keep us from seeing. But the power of truth is much more powerful than anything else. And we just have to align ourselves with it. We just have to say, this is really what I want. And I'm going to work for it. And even if it means not having the satisfaction of hitting send on that really obnoxious but really kind of smart email that puts that person in their place, those are the things that you give up when you align yourself with the path. You give up the ease and the comfort of being able to just tell white lies whenever you'd like to, because it's so much easier than telling the truth. Oh, did you pick up those groceries I had asked you to, honey? Oh, the store was closed, I'm so sorry. So much easier to say than I completely forgot. Or yeah, I went, but they didn't have what you wanted. So much easier than facing our own fallibilities. But every time that we choose untruth in any way. We're getting out of alignment with truth. And if we're getting out of alignment with truth, we're farther and farther from the possibility of waking up. But these are really small prices to pay. You learn to just stand in your own fallibility. I forgot. I'm so sorry. It's okay. It happens. You're human. And as we do that, we find that we live more and more in light. And then slowly, slowly that light just grows. And then it becomes what we call enlightenment. So it's there for everyone. Absolutely. Other questions?
Namaste, Sadhviji.
Namaste.
This question's about spiritual guidance for making big life decisions. So we often make decisions that will influence our life, and sometimes there's the intellectual view and the instinctual view. And if we go with everyone having their own calling, their own dharma, what would be your guidance for how to spiritually make the decision that's the best for your own path, spiritually?
So I think what you're asking is, and correct me if I didn't get it right, how do we make the decision that's the best for our own spiritual dharma when we find ourselves face to face with so many conflicting poles, right? Because if we live in a vacuum, that decision's not difficult. It becomes difficult when there's a lot of conflicting poles. And this is where, first of all, it's really critical for us to distinguish my dharma from my desires, my dharma from my laziness, my dharma from my personal preferences. So, for example, I may not really like to do chores around the house. Don't like to wash the dishes, don't like to help clean up, don't like to take out the trash. And if I convince myself that my dharma is to be this enlightened spiritual being, and that requires 24 hours a day of attention, that every waking moment must be spent only in my meditation, well, that's a really easy way not to have to hold up my end of the deal with the family chores. It's very easy to say, so sorry, I'm meditating because I'm put on earth for much more important things than taking out the trash. I'm getting enlightened, you take out the trash. And yet, when we look at the real sages, the saints, the mystics, the enlightened beings, well, the vast majority of them live alone in caves or in small hermitages, where guess what? They wash dishes. Maybe only a few, but they wash their own. They keep the area clean. They do all of their chores. They chop firewood. They gather water from a river, a well. But yet, you see a lot this sort of spiritual arrogance. As we embark on a spiritual path, as we start to connect with what feels like our dharma, This idea that somehow now we are too important to do these small, small things. And so I would be really careful of that, because that's never true, ever, ever. And if your mind is saying, my Dharma is so much more important than these little things, you've got a lot of work with your ego to do. So before you even start to think about actually making decisions that are going to change your life, you've got to make sure that you know who are all the players in the internal drama that's going on in your mind. Because the ego loves to play dress up as the wise sage in your mind and tell you what to do as it's, puts on the long white beard, the costume of the enlightened being in your mind. So you've got to be really careful of that voice of the ego. You've also got to be really careful of the voice of desire. So for example, I've had people say things to me like, literally, no names being mentioned of course, but literally I've had people say things to me like, I just don't think it's my Dharma to be monogamous. I think, well, that's really interesting, because I'm certainly not the relationship police. I'm not going to sit there and tell you how to run your marriage or your relationship. But there isn't a Dharma I've heard of that involves lying, cheating, disloyalty, harming others, taking advantage of others, simply for the fulfillment of your own sensual pleasures. That's not a Dharma that I've ever heard of anyone actually having. But I have had people try to convince me that that was their Dharma. And again, I'm not the Dharmic police. But I tried to help them understand really the difference between a Dharma and a desire. Having difficulty maintaining monogamy, having an urge to cheat on one's spouse, is very normal and natural, that urge. But that's not your Dharma to cheat. That's you not being able to keep your own desires in check. It's you not being able to make decisions that are in alignment with values or ethics or whatever. So the very first important step is really make sure that this is your Dharma you're talking about, that you're about to make a huge decision based on. Not simply a desire, not simply you're running away from because it's a challenge, it's difficult. Responsibilities are hard. But that doesn't mean it's your Dharma to run away from it. So first make sure that you're clear on the inside. And then once you are, there is a critical loyalty that each of us absolutely must have to our own spiritual Dharma, above all else. And it doesn't mean to the exclusion of all else, it just means above all else. And so, for example, history and our scriptures and scriptures of other religions are filled with stories of saints, sages, rishis, prophets, breaking a normal cultural norm, either in a way they live or in a truth they've discovered, because they know that this is their Dharma. And because when something is your Dharma, you almost can't not live it. The Buddha didn't leave the palace because he was fed up with his wife and kid, tired of being a husband, tired of being a father, stressed out over what it was going to be like when he finally inherited the kingdom. That wasn't what sent him out of the palace. He wasn't running away from. He was walking toward wisdom and awakening that sent him away from there into the forests for the meditation. And so in the same way, when something is our Dharma, we've got a really clear responsibility to live that. And you look at Arjun's Dharma to fight the war of the Mahabharat. Well, that wasn't easy. Wasn't fun. Wasn't something that all of his family members said, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let's get into a war and kill our other family members and put our lives at risk. But it was his Dharma. They had to do it. And so when you know something is your Dharma, you have to do it. And even though it's above all else, it's not to the exclusion, as I said, of all else. So whatever other responsibilities you have, it's not that you abandon them all. But it's that you realize what you're working toward is being able to live your spiritual Dharma. And so you take care of things in such a way that you're not causing harm to others, but that you're also not causing harm to your own self, because not living your Dharma is harm. And here's another piece. When I realized that my Dharma was to be here in India, to be a monastic renunciant, to live here in an ashram, it wasn't easy. It wasn't what my parents wanted to hear. I was 25. I was a PhD student. They expected, a house with a white picket fence and a bunch of babies a couple years down the line. They had a completely different view of what life was going to be. But I knew that I couldn't live that life. I knew that this was my Dharma. And here's what's interesting, is as much as it was difficult in the beginning, not so much for my dad, but for my mom. My dad really got it on a very beautiful level. Mom did too, but moms are moms, and she had her attachment to the babies I was going to pop out and where I was going to live, and it was really hard for her. And yet, the transformation that she underwent over the last 25 years, that she never would have gone through if I had forsaken this and just said, okay, Mom, I don't want to hurt you. I'll stay in California. I'll pop out the babies. We'll vacation together in Palm Springs just like you thought. If I had done that, I would have been not only depriving myself, but I would have been depriving her of having her own transformation, of all of the lessons that she had to learn, what she went through. When you realize that your agenda of what you thought life was going to look like is actually not at all what your life is going to look like, and yet that what it looks like is so beautiful. I mean, that's a huge transformation. Excuse me. So, as you move to live your Dharma, realize that you're actually creating that situation for others to live theirs as well. And it may not be easy for them. It really may not. But our Dharma on earth is not to prevent everyone we know and love from ever having to confront difficult situations. Yeah, we want to keep them as happy as we can, of course. But the end goal of life, anybody's life, is not to avoid as many difficult situations as we can. It's about growing and blossoming and learning and opening. And when one person aligns themselves with their Dharma and makes that decision and it kind of disrupts the system, well, it creates ripples in the system in which everybody in that system then has to kind of readjust themselves. And in that readjustment, no matter as difficult as it may be for them in that moment, they learn and they grow and they open and they change. I mean, it was phenomenally transformative for my mom. And I've seen that in so many other people. And lastly, you're not doing anybody a favor by handing over your life on the altar of their emotional comfort. That's not a favor to someone. Because whatever they don't learn in this life, they're just going to have to come back and learn next life anyway. Oh, you didn't learn how to deal with when life isn't exactly what you wanted? Okay, no problem. You'll learn it next time. We have to keep coming back and doing this until we learn all of those lessons. And so the realer and the truer and the more aligned with your heart you can be this time around, not only the better is it for you, but the more of that space you create and the ripples that you create for others then to live that as well. Beautiful. Have a beautiful rest of your evening and a beautiful day tomorrow. We will not be having satsang tomorrow. I have to go to Delhi in the morning. I will be back late night tomorrow night. So we won't have satsang tomorrow. But I will look forward to seeing you all again on... Today's Tuesday? I look forward to seeing you all again on Thursday.